Hello, this is Tommy. Also, Zhida Tai is my legal name, and I'll be doing a presentation on President Lincoln and the 13th Amendment. The first part will be the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln had run on an anti-slavery platform. This caused many southern states to feel that there was no longer a place for them in the Union. On December 20, 1960, South Carolina would secede, and by February of the following year, 6 other states would join in seceding from the Union: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. They would then form the Confederate States of America, and Jefferson Davis as their provisional president. To understand why the southern states would secede and go to war with Abraham Lincoln's rise to presidency, we have to consider the southern economy. Specifically, the South was largely based on plantations that produced commercial crops like cotton. Slaves were a main labor force. The price of cotton, the South's defining crop, had skyrocketed in the 1850s, and the value of slaves, who were, after all, property, rose consummatively. By 1860, the per capita wealth of Southern whites was twice that of Northerners, and 3/5 of the wealthiest individuals in the country were Southerners. While the North invested in industrialization and transportation innovations such as railroads, steamboats, the South was still deeply rooted in the use of slaves as a labor force to power the economic engine. President Lincoln's rise to prominence was a threat to the economic and cultural way of life to the Southern states. The next is about the Emancipation Proclamation. Following attacks by the Confederacy on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the federal troops returned fire and the Civil War had begun. 4 more states would secede following the attack. President Lincoln at the time spoke to the border states to ensure their loyalty. He would go on to insist that the Civil War was not about freeing slaves, but rather preserving the Union. His words also spoke to the northern white men who were not interested in fighting a war to give rights to Black people. This can be seen when Lincoln continued the laws stopping Black men from joining the army. However, by 1862, Lincoln considered emancipation as a necessary step towards winning the war. The Confederacy was using slaves to build fortifications, working factories, and hospitals. Slaves were seen in the role of laundresses, blacksmiths, nurses, etc. While the North refused the service of Black volunteers, European powers also were considering backing the Confederacy. So with the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln created massive public support for the North in Europe. With the Emancipation Proclamation, it also changed the tone of the war. Rather than fighting a war to preserve the Union, it now had a moral cause in the case of freeing the slaves. The Federal Army would also officially accept Black men as soldiers, and African-American men were eager to join and enlist. Included is a picture of the men of the 4th United States Colored Infantry Regiment. The next slide is the president's challenge. On January 1st, 1864, Congressman Isaac Arnold paid a visit to President Lincoln. According to Arnold's accounts, he congratulated the president on the victories he has achieved, and their conversation went something like this. "I hope, Mr. President, that on next New Year's Day, I have the pleasure of congratulating you on 3 events which now seem very probable." Lincoln said, "What are they?" He said, "First, that the war may be ended by the complete triumph of the Union forces. Second, that slavery may be abolished and prohibited throughout the Union by the amendment to the Constitution. Third, Abraham Lincoln had been re-elected president." Abraham Lincoln then said, "I think," he replied with a smile, "I think, my friend, I'll be willing to accept the first 2 by way of compromise." After debate began in the House of Representatives on the 13th Amendment, President Lincoln was actively involved in the effort to find votes for the amendment. Secretaries were sent on discreet businesses to ensure votes from congressmen, while border state representatives were brought to the White House for personal interviews with the president. One quote was, "The greatest measure of the 19th century," remarked the canny Thais Stevens, "was passed by corruption, aided and abetted by the purest man in America." Historian Alan Nevins also notes that the day of the vote for the amendment, one publication declared that even up to the noon, the issue had been in doubt. The final slide is a king's cure-all. President Lincoln called the 13th Amendment a king's cure-all, which referenced evening primrose oils, which was prescribed by doctors of the era to treat a variety of ailments. President Lincoln understood the multifaceted nature of emancipation and hoped that the amendment would tackle the issue on multiple fronts and ultimately the problems created from slavery. It formally abolished slavery and was passed by the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House of Representatives on January 31st, 1865. While the amendment formally abolished slavery, it also helped eliminate the one issue that tore the nation apart. With this legislation, Lincoln hoped to create a stronger nation. He envisioned a unified country with free labor economics, steeped in the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. With the 13th Amendment, there would have been a legal protection for personal freedom that would apply to all Americans, regardless of race or color. However, even as Lincoln fought to give equal rights to people of all color, there was still pushback. This can be seen most evidently in systems of voter suppression like literacy tests, poll taxes, and complex voter registration systems that blocked Black voters from being able to have a voice. With the current issues surrounding brutality, like police brutality and the movement of Black Lives Matter, it would not be a stretch to say that the issues faced by Lincoln are still present today. There is a legal protection, but when the police force who is in charge of upholding that legal justice are the ones that are perpetuating systemic racism, there's still quite a long road ahead for equality for all. Thank you so much. This was my presentation.